Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. This is episode number 26 with Brian LeDuc, a good friend of mine, a fellow kind of higher ed hustler, as I'm starting to call it, part of just a little meetup group that I've had. Ashley, recent episode, was another member, and I'm sure we'll get to the other members, Grant Troll and Kevin O'Connell soon, but always good talking with Brian. He always kind of gets my energy flowing with his enthusiasm and just the really cool, unique path that he's had. He's really experienced a lot of the sort of continually blossoming higher ed adjacent world. So he'll talk more about that and all the cool stuff that he has cooking up right now. So as always, all the cool stuff that we talk about is in the show notes, and strap in for a super awesome episode here after this brief message from our sponsor. This is episode number 26 with Brian LeDuc. It's an honor to have our good friends at SwiftCake be a sponsor of the podcast because I've seen their work firsthand, and it's truly unlike any student leadership training I've experienced. They've been voted Best Student Leadership Program unprecedented 5 times, so you know they must be doing something right. As a bonus for our listeners, SwiftCake is giving a $500 discount off their normal speaking fee if you mention Higher Ed Geek when you contact them. I highly recommend their trainings for your campus, as your students will be talking about it for months afterwards. It's really great stuff. Check them out, swiftcakehq.com, to learn more, and let them know I sent you. Now, back to the show. But yeah, I'm excited for this just because, I feel like, you know, I've noted this, I think, to you before, just like I always get very like energized by our conversations, and I know you always have a lot of kind of different things cooking or different ideas and just like, you know, a lot of thoughts. So it'll be interesting to just like kind of hear, and especially just sort of like, I don't know, people have taken it very many different ways, but just sort of like what you geek out about. So it's always kind of funny that way. But yeah, I mean, we'll jump in here, and I'll link out to the episode that we did prior, just for, you know, folks who might be interested, for the Student Affairs Collective podcast. But yeah, we'll get into all the other stuff. But real quick, if you want to give a quick introduction of yourself to get us started, and just kind of how you got to be where you are today, and then we'll kind of pick and, you know, choose some different stuff from kind of your story to dig in a little bit deeper with.
Very cool. Yeah. So I'm Brian LeDuc. I am currently at the Education Design Lab, where I'm an education designer, and that probably is not particularly clear to folks who are listening. So in effect, I design sessions where I'm sharing tools related to human-centered design, lean startup, and other innovation methodologies that are really helping universities to consider the way that they're delivering services on their campus and the way that they're interacting with their students, and ensuring that what they're building is actually grounded in the student's point of view. And the particular sort of area that the lab has focused its work, and really the tagline that I've been living in for about the last year and a half, is designing education toward the future of work. We're seeing an incredible number of trends that are driving the way that universities are now starting to think about how they adapt. And we're a part of, you know, how they're thinking about their strategy in that area, and what they're building towards. But, you know, where I started was as a psych student at Roger Williams University, growing up in a small town in central Massachusetts. So I never would have expected myself to be in DC, and never would have expected myself as a first-gen student to have gotten as involved on campus as I did. And that's really that was the rocket fuel into higher ed and into education. It was like sitting across from Chuck Stanley, as freshman class president, talking to him about the next event that we were planning, and him saying, "Did you know, like, this is a career?" You know, like the story that every student affairs professional has at some point in their career about having that interaction with, a really formative mentor in their career path. And it was from that I was working and going to school at Texas A&M, passed through a couple of different student activities or student involvement or student engagement offices, alongside some orientation work and some leadership development work. And since then, I've been sort of what maybe we would all call higher ed adjacent, and continuing into my current role. So I was at the Education Advisory Board for a while, helping to implement an academic advising student success technology on campuses. So I was working with, provosts and presidents who were, thinking about how they were improving their retention and graduation rates, and they, had purchased the Student Success Collaborative tool, and they needed basically strategic help about how to implement it. But we'd also collected 10 years of historic data. And so I was looking at, just unbelievable amounts of historic retention and graduation rate data, and then using that to basically build out what the strategy was going to be, what the approach for, in many cases, translating an academic advising approach that was maybe more reactive to one that was going to be more strategic and data driven, and equipping academic advisors with both a tool and some guidance, through that data analysis about where they might focus their time and attention. And it was about 2.5 years in that I started talking with folks at the Iron Yard, which was a small coding boot camp. And actually, that's I think when we probably last did our podcast together.
Yeah.
And so I joined the DC campus as their campus director. So I was, effectively running all things student experience. So everywhere from, the marketing in DC through the enrollment process, student support one-on-one while students were in the program, and then building relationships with employers externally, to get students placed once they'd completed the 12-week boot camp, and learning how to code. So, the last probably 4.5 years really has been adjacent to higher ed, but in many ways, sort of right now I'm working at the confluence of all of those past areas of my work. It's sort of like a little bit of student success, a little bit of student experience design, a little bit of small tests done over time, and a lot of thinking about how we design both systems and experiences that help students to be more successful. So that's maybe a long-winded answer, but that's where I came from.
No, yeah, I mean you covered it, and yeah, you've kind of had that journey of sort of going where the wind takes you, and yeah, I mean I certainly share that feeling sometimes if I'm like, man, if I could go back and talk to like high school me, like I don't know where I thought I was going to end up, but it certainly wasn't here. But I'm kind of grateful for the journey there. But
it's funny. I started at Roger Williams as a marketing major. Thought I was going to be going right into an enterprise, like either consulting, or I was like thinking I was going to be in ads, or it's so funny now to think about that conception of my mind was entirely the result of just such a limited frame of reference. I just was thinking that, oh, okay, so I want to go work in business, and if I'm going to be in marketing, that means I'm going to be creating ads. And now entire industries have exploded since that point. And I mean, I do some digital marketing stuff, but that doesn't have to be, that's not my job, it's not where the depth of my knowledge and expertise has been built.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's many people's experience, because I know some people, that shared story of how people happen upon higher ed and student affairs. And
Totally.
I know for my current role at 2U, we have a lot of people that end up here that, worked in some other education capacity, just didn't feel like it was the right fit, and then, ended up here. And I know sometimes there's actually a lot of people in my cohort for my higher ed grad program that thought they wanted to kind of K through 12 classroom instruction, didn't feel like the right fit, ended up in higher ed. And it's just that idea of they want to work in education, but they want something different. They want to help people, and all that sort of thing. So it's always something that people sort of happen upon, but I think always for good reasons, and it resonates with them. And it's certainly now even just for the frame of reference of in my grad program, people being like, well, what do you want to do? It's my frame of reference for the entire sort of higher ed adjacent world and things that people do outside of campus-based work didn't even exist. And I think now it's people ask, would you ever go back? And I'm like, maybe, but I'd be so picky. I would be very, particular, I guess, about how I would go back. But,
right. And not to mention how much, higher education in general is going to be disrupted. It's sort of where do you want to now plug back in, and how, and what should that look? I mean, 2U is a great example of it. We've talked about this before, but the the set of acquisitions and the use of the way that WeWork is approaching itself as a platform, and sort of like acquiring Meetup and partnering with 2U and acquiring Flatiron. Like, there are existing entities that are looking at groups like WeWork and the way that they're becoming community platforms, and the networked campus and the sort of remote worker who is doing student development work but not working on a college campus is like an emerging reality. And so like, even graduate preparation is still sort of looking at a traditional route into a traditional on-campus grounded experience, when there are a lot of ways to use that skill set and still be working with students who are going to post-secondary, which is even, which blows my mind consistently, because it, like you said, it emerged literally since the time that we both graduated from our master's degrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a brave new world. But I guess, yeah, it's sort of like you mentioned, sort of like, this kind of point of like a limited frame of reference, like that's sort of where you were at in your undergraduate career. You mentioned like some involvements in there. So I guess before we move on and explore a little bit more of like your current world and the different things that you do, is there any kind of like little anecdote or story or anything else, in particular that you might want to mention from your undergraduate college days that was just like a formative experience for you, just personally and or professionally?
When I was a senior in high school, I'm going to go all the way back, like pre-college, because I think the transition from high school to college, and I was just, so I'm also a facilitator for Kiwanis, where I run high school leadership retreats, and I was just with a group of 70 high school students in Pennsylvania. So this like story is fresh on my mind, because I was telling it to them, because it's sort of the group that ends up being at Key Leader events is probably the group that I would have been part of had I known about Key Leader during that time in my high school career. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't there because there was a whole bunch of other stuff that was happening in my life. I wasn't finding my way, wasn't super connected with school, wasn't very involved, was generally pretty, what's the right word for it? I was generally like pretty disconnected, and pretty angsty as a high school kid. But when I started to look at colleges, I got on campus at Roger Williams and walked around and was like, oh, this is where I want to be. And when I was getting ready to go back on campus for orientation, I had decided before I left that I was going to run for freshman class president. Uh-huh. And like my mom, who, has always been super supportive, but like I said, I'm a first generation college student. And so like, she had no idea. She like didn't know how to prep me for the college experience in general, despite the fact that my sister's 8 years older. And so like, she gave me some wayfinding from a distance, but it's like sort of secondhand, and accounting for the fact that that there wasn't the same level of guidance from my mom in the process. But she's like looking at me like, you're going to be what? So I go to orientation and I find who's going to be my vice president, like who's going to be my running mate in my orientation group, and get back and I'm like talking to family friends about the fact that I'm going to run for freshman class president when I get on campus. My mom is like, who is this kid? So the day before I'm supposed to move in, I get a call from one of my roommates, which by the way was in a quad in like the freshman residence hall on campus. And he's like, hey man, like, there are only a couple of us on campus because they were trying to let people who were from further away come to campus first. He's like, hey man, I'm all set up in the room, like we're ready. If you want to come out, you can. And so I look at my mom. We moved in the night before move-in at like 8 or 9 o'clock. Like I look back and like the hall director, the RA on my floor, they must have just been like completely blindsided by like this car with a small trailer, because my mom owned a small business and she had a trailer that she would use to take inventory to different stores. Uh-huh. Like pulls up to the front of Cedar Hall at Roger Williams. We're like, we're moving in. They're like, what are you doing here? So that was probably emblematic of the level of enthusiasm that I had going to Roger Williams, but I had no idea like why or like what it was about. and the involvement as freshman class president just was the rocket fuel for everything that came after in terms of involvement in higher ed. Because I looked around, I was just like, I love this designing of experiences for other people. Like, this is awesome. And I had no idea, I hadn't put it into those words yet, but that's what was behind it.
Very cool. That's I think working in res life, it's like we always have those people who are just like, I'm here, and I'm like, all right, get in here, you knucklehead, because it's like, I'm not gonna turn you away, like, you're here, it's fine. Right. So yeah, it's funny. It's just like, you're one of those people, but just it's like, very eager, you're excited, just yeah, and like you're saying, you didn't like really articulate it in the exact words that you would now, but always somebody who I think thought in the way of kind of designing experiences to kind of achieve positive outcomes. So that's kind of what you're doing now. I guess just speak a little bit more about that in terms of like what attracted you to this job. You've been in it for a little while, and just like what you enjoy most about your current work.
Yeah, so we work on a whole range of different types of projects. So we're a national nonprofit, so we end up getting a range of individual schools who are trying to approach a very particular problem, have articulated or may not have yet articulated what it is that they're trying to accomplish, but they just know that like they've identified a pain point and they need to learn a little bit more about it before they figure out how they're going to adjust. And in other cases, we're working with, a large foundation who's got a group of schools that are all, looking to learn from one another while they're attempting to solve a unified problem that they've identified across all those different institutions. So much of my work sort of focuses in the former of that, where we'll get a 2-day or 3-day engagement where we're usually both asked to teach a little bit of design thinking, human-centered design, and some of the tools and methodologies that are associated with it. And then as an extension of that, sort of use those teaching moments as propulsion to, do some work against the challenge that they've identified. For more sustained projects, like there's one that I'm working on now with a campus who's looking at building out a branch campus in the Southwest. That it's been like a year's worth of work in a few different aspects, and part of that was like a market analysis, and part of it was going and meeting with all these different community stakeholders and learning more about like what the community needs were. Part of it was about engaging with local employers and high school students and learning what their needs were, and then like building something out of that and showing it back to them, and then them circulating it with their set of stakeholders. And now we're actually going through the process of like building that thing. So it's super interesting in terms of like the range and the different number of conceptions of the work that we're doing. And as you sort of noted, it very much is about building experiences for people and kind of creating moments for people to discover something new. And then I think probably one of the most helpful components of utilizing an approach like design thinking. There are a few different methodologies, tons of different methodologies to be able to like use as a way of visualizing collectively against a goal that a problem that you're trying to solve. And in many cases, people talk around what it is that they're meaning, and there isn't a whole lot of structure or clarity or agreement about what they're trying to develop. So what we're kind of building into is, here are some common frameworks and a common language and a way of like looking at something in the collective format visually. And sometimes that's like sticky notes, other times it's pictures, other times it's something active in the room. And once people start to like see what it is, and I literally visually, it's like visualized in front of them. Now you're having a more productive debate, and it's about content. It's not about like who's in the room. It's like slightly more democratized than you would typically find if you were having a conversation about how to structure a program, for instance. And so like that's what I love about it, because people get out of their heads and onto paper, and that's where you actually start to see the substance of an idea, and then you can more effectively manipulate and evaluate it in ways that you can't when it's, either in prose or in just conversation.
Yeah, very cool stuff. And I guess I'm very intrigued by the almost doing it on a very macro scale of like doing it like a branch campus and almost like using it from the get-go, building something from the ground up, a kind of brick and mortar experience, versus like, I'm sure many campuses, they just need to work with the space that they already have, or it has to kind of fill in sort of cracks that exist versus, utilizing a kind of a design thinking mindset to build something from the ground up. So that's really cool.
And when you're building something, like when nothing exists, I mean, if you were to now start a university, it would look vastly different than what we have planted all over the country. And so like there's freedom that comes, like there's permission that comes with that. And that's really a fun aspect of it, that we're not designing like the university that you see all over the country today. You're designing something that is built for the emerging needs, so that it will meet them when, as they're becoming evident.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I guess, if it's sort of stuff in this vein or just other kind of just personal interest or whatever, I'm very curious to hear, sort of the things that you geek out about currently, if it's, newer discoveries or stuff that you've always been into. And I guess if you take it from either angle, if it's more kind of professional or sort of academic interests or just kind of fun stuff that you get really excited about. But kind of what are you geeking out about?
So I've been really captured by just like future of work as a category of just stuff. Like we're probably in one of the most interesting times of human evolution in quite some time. And to be sort of like on the pre-crest of the wave, but like able to see the crest forming is pretty insane. Like, to have grown up like barely using dial-up internet and like AIM, like instant messenger, and now to be going into my apartment and saying like, Alexa, play whatever. And that being like the early end of the curve is crazy to me. And I think it has unbelievable implications for the way that we're all going to experience work and life, and what it will mean for identity. And so all that is at the core of in effect what I'm geeking out over, because it has huge implications for higher ed, has huge implications for what we teach and how we teach and where we teach. And so you'll probably notice it. Like, I think work-life balance is sort of bullshit. I think we're balls of energy, and I don't necessarily care what I'm doing as I'm enjoying it. So I find myself like spending a lot of time listening to podcasts and learning new things and creating meetup groups and doing stuff that is like not my job, but is equally as energizing. And so like as a facet of that, the sort of research around future of work has implications for what I do every day, but is like stuff that I like to go home and do.
Uh-huh. Yeah, just kind of like creative, hobbies that may produce things or not, or just like you're absorbing information and learning yourself, which then sort of kind of impacts your work, or kind of like nurturing these other kind of networks and groups and hobbies and things like that. Because for me, it's like I write, I do this podcast, and I want to go out to an event and talk to people about things and just kind of generate ideas and get inspired. But and I mean, I think it came up before when you were kind of talking a lot about like sort of your journey and sort of like, okay, I'm going to school, I have to pick a major, and that you're sort of doing that with some sort of nebulous career in mind. And then a lot of the work that you're doing is, kind of building education for the future of work. And I think I'm not surrounding myself with a lot of people who are, like there's a lot of people who are very vocal about that sort of like, okay, we need to improve higher education to help support the future of work. And I'm sure there's other people who are kind of either against that kind of notion
Sure.
or hesitant about it or just quiet about it because it makes people kind of uncomfortable. But I know, the way that you kind of framed it is like, part of it is, yes, we need to make sure we have those things that bring us joy integrated into our lives, but work, it's not about making college into just factories that pump out, whatever
Right.
corporations want or something, but it's like work is the way that we contribute to the world. And I think we want people to be able to find, those intersections of what they're good at and what they're into, but also just make sure that, that we build a smarter world, that we build a better world, and that we equip people to be able to do that, because I think a lot about just like renewable energy and just like, stuff like Tesla power packs like existing. It's like we need smart people who are like really into that stuff to be enabled to create things that harness solar energy and store it for later, because we've had solar panels for a while, and part of the reason why they don't catch on is because it's like, well, what happens when it's not sunny? And it's like, only now are we being like, yeah, we figured that out. We've got a solution now. We got like, power packs to store, solar energy or wind energy or whatever. So it's like, yeah, you want to enable people because it's also like there's so many amazing stories yet to be told. So even if it's somebody going to school to nurture their, kind of creative energy to get a full-time career, it's like, especially in America, entertainment has been dominated by, white men for a long time. So it's like, let's nurture people to be able to cultivate that, to share new stories and to bring more insights and sort of, emotional awakenings and awareness and all the different stuff. So it's just like, yeah, I've kind of clicked that into place, and it's like, there's a lot there if you really get down into the details, but certainly one of the biggest needs, like you were mentioning, is just like, with, smart homes and
Right.
AI and, virtual reality and all that kind of stuff. It's like, there's a lot of tech that is baked into building education for the future of work, but there's a lot more there. And I think, that's a discussion that I hope people.
It's so funny, the idea that what we're now doing by adapting higher ed to meet workforce needs, and that in some way being against sort of the core underlying foundation for why universities were created, is like fascinating to me, because at its absolute foundation, if we're talking about creating citizens who are able to live lives of purpose and meaning, like if you like wrap up like liberal arts education as creating citizens with the purpose of who understand their purpose and meaning over time, and are able to learn how to learn and continually integrate new information and adapt, like we're actually at the like ultimate inflection point of being able to do that effectively. And so the adaptation, if you're really paying attention to what is happening in the future of work, is that like they don't need a cog. They don't need someone who's just gonna plug in somewhere. Like routine, non-cognitive work will go away. So the idea that we would just be like adapting someone to a workforce need is fascinating to me, because the workforce need is human. Like what we need are like creative systems thinkers who are able to adapt over time and think critically, and who work well with others. And like that's what a university needs to get like unbelievably good at doing. And share some technical knowledge. The emergence, and part of my reason for going over to the Iron Yard was just like curiosity about how does this thing work. And the reality is that like the vast majority of students that were going to a program that's based on what programs like the Iron Yard are about, is they're looking for a career change signal. Like they need to learn a new skill, and that is enough to get them in the door. But like they still need those core human skills, like the ones that were getting hired and finding like had multiple offers and were doing really well as they were making the transition, were the ones that like had the human thing locked. And it's partially because they had worked before, and partially because, particularly in DC, there were some of like the most educated people. Like they had bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and some like JDs and PhDs. So it was like the lifelong learning element of what we need to embed within universities, and the types of skills that we're trying to cultivate are so much more human, and those are actually the workforce demanded skills. So like the idea of a dichotomy between the two, sorry, I'm like going on a rant here, but the idea that there's like a dichotomy between the two is like a complete misnomer. It's like no one's listening long enough to hear what is actually being said. So I guess that's another geek out.
Yeah. So yeah, we just like had a geek out kind of showcased right here. Yeah. But it's like, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what it is. And I know, cause I think the next question here is just sort of like this particular things that you are kind of like consuming right now. But I know one for me that I just mentioned to somebody that gets into a lot of this stuff, which I'm not sure if you have, checked it out yet, but they've now kind of gotten into the rhythm with new episodes is Future You, which is Jeff Salingo and Michael Horn. It's kind of a combination of them talking about stuff, which, they're
Totally.
people kind of in this space. And then they always have a guest, but I like how their format is either preceding or after the interview, they just sort of talk through kind of the issue at hand. But yeah, it's getting into that stuff because I think, part of that sort of weird kind of limbo that we're in now is that like a lot of people are looking to the past to determine the future, of just like, like college and it being for a select few. So it has to be built, or it was built in a certain way for a select few. And it is more leaning towards just sort of like personal fulfillment and just liberal arts, sort of like generalist, just to build you as a full human being, which can always still be part of it. And that is valuable. And that experience, I think, will always exist and people can seek it out if they want to. But building sort of quality education at scale that's flexible and sort of lifelong, to meet those needs for different things and, things that we don't even know exist yet. That's what the more recent episode they just had was sort of like saying that we're in this like fifth age of higher ed, which check out the episode so you can learn what all the ages are. It makes a lot of sense. It was really cool. But this like historical phasing, and we're just entering into this very new phase, but we've, higher ed has existed and evolved and grown through all these phases. And, we're just in the thick of a very disruptive one now where, some schools have been closing or, getting rid of certain majors or programs, but, it's sort of that idea of clear out space to make room for other things. So, and I think it's just the duplicity across like, there's just been this one model that everybody replicates for the most part in terms of like higher ed, but it's like, I think there's just a need for more different kinds of.
I'm scrolling through episodes right now. I'm seeing like, Joseph Owen, president of Northeastern, Kathy Davidson, Michael Crow, just, like a killer cast of super sharp folks who are part of this conversation. So much stuff to be unpacked here. I mean, what's fascinating, I think, what's worth spending a minute on is who we think we're serving has changed and will continue to change in such drastic ways. Particularly, if you look at even just like enrollment trends in the Northeast. I mean, I think the evolution of what will become the coming of age experience, sort of like as the way I categorize it in my mind, like 4-year on-campus residential continuous relationship with higher ed. I think like it's going to shift. And so how do you prepare mindsets of both like students, of parents as they're like shopping with their students, and and administrators on campus who like have a set of underlying principles that have ruled the reality of the day about the way that their world works. And when so many of those things get shaken up, it's going to be a really interesting decade, I think, for higher ed. So the the underlying goal of where part of my reason for even spending time in automation of all things, or like the future of retail of all things, is because I think there are small signals for how we now take lessons and learn and adapt and apply them within the context that we're working in higher ed.
Yeah, because like higher ed, as much as it kind of is a bubble, is still part of the world, and the world affects higher ed as much as it affects the world. So, I think the next decade, I'm sure, just will be very interesting to see. Well, and I guess, as you're kind of geeking out about a lot of these kind of topics and things, or, just anything else that kind of is bringing you joy recently, like what are you consuming? Like what are you reading, watching, listening to? Anything that you'd like to mention so that we could include in the show notes?
I was actually just listening to the Katrina Lake, How I Built This. I'm talking about her test of Stitch Fix. One, I just love Guy Raz and the types of questions that he asks of people, and more importantly, the way that he pushes people on answering in areas that he senses are maybe taboo about what they want to talk about versus what they're there to talk about. And so I just love how he will hone in on something and just go deep on it. But maybe even more meta across basically every show. The Stitch Fix episode jumps out at me. The Airbnb, the Joe Gebbia episode for Airbnb jumps out at me. And what I think is so interesting and so fun about that show is that it's permission. It basically is these folks who identified something in their life that was bugging the hell out of them, and they decided what's the smallest thing that I can do today to learn something about whether or not the thing that I see in the world is irritating to other people, and could that be a business that I build my life around? Katrina Lake knew that she wanted to start some kind of a business, or she actually had worked as basically a note taker for a VC firm, I think, and she was seeing all these companies come through, and her aspiration, I think, was to eventually find one that she wanted to join and pitch them as they were pitching her company to go join them and leave this note taking role that she was in to go jump on a rocket ship. But what ended up happening is she decided to go back to business school and ended up in a Harvard MBA program and was testing a couple of different ideas, but stumbled upon this idea of Stitch Fix and thinking about the future of retail and how stores were closing and going, I think that we're going to need a different solution here at some point. And so she found basically strangers in Boston and handed out a short survey for them to give her information about what their shopping preferences and style was. And she got a credit card with a $6,000 limit, shopped for them, and then gave them all the stuff and was able to manage the receipts on the back end. That with 20 people in Boston was her test before she started to go get funding. So what I love about that show is just that it's about what can I do at the lowest possible barrier to entry to find out if what I think is true about the world is true. And if that's the case, then how do I now find what the next question is? And the next question is. That's just a series of small experiments. And Joe Gebbia's story about Airbnb, I won't go into it, but it's he basically saw a conference coming to San Francisco and literally blew up an air mattress and made a website. And that was the .01 of Airbnb. So I just love that show because it's permission. It's what can you go learn? There was a time that right after I left the Iron Yard, I was wondering if there was a market for it basically admissions advising or admissions coaching for different boot camps. So bought up a URL, made a Twitter account, started following people who were talking about whether or not they wanted to go to a boot camp. Bought $10 worth of Facebook ads and put them out there into the world and just saw what happened. It's that stuff that's just so much fun. It gives permission, and it's you have so many fewer barriers than you believe that you have to quote unquote starting a business or starting a new program or starting something new. You just need a little bit of ingenuity and a little bit of permission and a little bit of structure, and with the right discipline to identify what are the things that you need to know right now versus what are the things that you can learn along the way. So I just love that show.
Yeah. Well, and because I assume not every one of my guests, especially with how they post and stuff, have listened to all my episodes. But just so you know, you have continued the trend. So if nobody who listens to this, or people who have listened to this haven't checked out How I Built This,
it's been, I think, half of the episodes, if not more, people independent of each other, because it's not even people being like, oh, I listened to your other episode and like they mentioned this and I want to recommend it too. It's just like, which is even better, like objectively people recommend the show because it's really good. And I mean, it's one of those ones too where like you're mentioning, you know, you could listen through all of them, they're all great stories. And yeah, there's like these very humble beginnings of these now like sometimes global companies, or those like, even if they've still just been like, oh, we carved out this niche for ourselves and we're just continuing to sort of like try to, you know, just kind of do our thing. But yeah, it's everything from like Ben and Jerry's to like Stitch Fix, Airbnb, LinkedIn, Netflix, like, you know, all these different kind of cool companies, like newer ones and older ones. So yeah, and it's just like these wild stories. The one, you know, the companies they had that didn't work out, or like, you know, just these kind of long meandering sort of journeys that people have been on, and it's it's the idea. It gives you permission, or just sort of just is like, like especially if you're doing like something where, because I think that's, you know, these people have very different stories, and some of the, you know, they are the very humble beginnings where, it's not as if it's like, oh, I need to come up with an idea that's like an overnight success that's going to scale from 0 to 2 million in like a year. I have to get like venture capital funding and I need to do all this stuff. It's like, just start something small if you're interested in, like you're saying, like see if you get traction and just try to like figure out what sort of like level of risk feels right, because that's sort of like what I think the zeitgeist has become obsessed with. It's just like, you know, an entrepreneur like doing a startup. It's like, well, you could just try and like rebrand of like, I'm starting a small business. Like that has a completely different connotation in people's minds. But it's that idea where it's like, no, you're like getting a reasonable amount of money. Yeah, like you're maybe using your credit card that has a high limit just to like get some, get some stuff to like, you know, the tools that you need to get going, and like, but you really need to be mindful of risks and, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. But it seems like, just a lot of people want to just like start a startup and like, you know, drop everything and ignore risk and just want it to be an overnight success. And if it's not, then you're a failure or whatever. Like, it's like that maybe works out for some people, but that's not the only path. And, you know, again, the world is going to need people with kind of clever, bright new ideas of how to do things better. And I think, a lot of times there's, room for everybody at the table, and maybe just defining what success looks like to you too. It doesn't, again, need to be like, you know, that you're now like $1 billion company or something in like a year. So it's just interesting stuff like that. So again, go check out How I Built This.
I feel the need to add like a layer of originality in there. So I've got like a handful of others that are always on my short list. And also, you know, like I got to make you work a little bit, because on the show notes, if you just like say How I Built This again, here are the same 4 episodes, you know, copy paste. That's, you know, it's like not super inspired. So I love the story behind the story. So Song Exploder is freaking awesome. They literally pick apart track by track different songs, and they've got the artist there talking about like the inspiration for it and what that sound was that you heard in the middle of the song that didn't make any sense, but was like somebody dropping a drumstick or whatever. 99% Invisible, which effectively is just like design related, but the story that led to why a certain thing was built in the way that it was. I'm a Christian, so the Bible Project is another great one. That like the 2 guys that run that podcast like are the biggest Bible nerds that you've ever met in your entire like ever. Like the level of depth of knowledge that they have and of detail that they go into is like insane. Tim Mackey, though, is a brilliant storyteller, so I love listening to. It's like they do these podcasts as a way of brainstorming for a set of short videos that they create, which is their primary function of their nonprofit. So, like, super interesting if that's at all something of curiosity. And then I listen to a lot of Ed Surge on air. Although what I'm discovering is that I should be also listening to Future You. I have a like 15-minute walk commute to work back and forth, so I don't get through a ton of episodes, generally speaking, I'll admit. But those are all on my short list.
Ed Surge is great, and it is just cool. I mean, just part of why I love podcasts. I mean, the Bible Project or something like that. Just like all these different affinities.
Right.
It's like anybody who's maybe just like dipping their feet in. There's so much good stuff out there, and Yeah, I think what it reassures me too, though, like what I'll say, is like refreshing about Future You is I think there are these two people that I think are very notable in their fields, but this show still feels very like kind of,
scrappy,
like they're making it into their garage kind of thing, so because it's like sometimes like you'll hear like sirens going by still, and it's just like that happens to me. So it's just like, because you imagine it's like, oh, we're starting this podcast, it's going to be like in a professional studio and all that, but it's like, they're taking it on the road too, so sometimes it's like weird, people's phones go off in the middle of it.
Ambulance sirens are the great unifier of the podcast world, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to avoid them unless you're in like a soundproof box somewhere. So we'll link out to all those shows and a lot of different stuff that you've mentioned. We will wrap up this episode just as we do on an optimistic note, something or things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world.
Whoa. So over the last probably just shy of a year, I've been working with a partner of mine in Austin, Spencer Ingram, who I think may be on your roadmap at some point, to build Best Monday Ever, and we're helping smart companies make career development a competitive advantage. And so we focused on enterprise and in higher ed. And so over the course of this summer, we're holding a series of basically I don't even want to use the word that gets associated with professional training in higher ed, but basically to just say very highly interactive events, experiences that are teaching a career discovery and exploration methodology that we call the looping method. So it's four steps. So I've been geeking out talking with career professionals, academic advisors, student success professionals, and just getting a ton of energy around like the challenges that are being faced on campus and the need for ways to approach work with a new mindset and the way that we work with students with a new mindset. Because I think when we invest in professionals that are working on the front lines with students every day, we're actually investing in student retention. So you're going to like wind me up for another rant, but Best Monday Ever, looping method, dojos are those 2-day events. So that's currently what my world is on fire for, and what I'm really excited about. So the first one is in a couple of weeks in DC, followed by dates in Austin, Nashville, Richmond, and Duluth, Minnesota. So be on the lookout.
Cool. I'll try to get this episode out before then, just so folks still might have some time to check out that DC one. We'll at least link out to everything, and folks can check it out. But I know you always have some cool stuff kind of cooking up over there. So I wish you luck with the looping method stuff, and folks can connect with you as well to follow up after the episode. But just really appreciate your time and all the stuff that you shared. And again, it's always energizing, because I think we both just get really kind of geeked out about this stuff and always have a lot of ideas, and are just just like a sponge for kind of all this good stuff, and just want to kind of make it happen and start getting to work. So just appreciate your time and all that you shared, and I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Dustin, thanks. Such a cool conversation.
This podcast is a proud member of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices and thoughtful discussions to the higher ed community. Check us out online at connectedu.network or on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.